I didn't even say a word. Just wore a bikini. They locked the door on me. Before we start today's video, I need your help. I have noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best way that you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thank you very much. I remember the exact moment I stepped out of the bathroom wearing that bikini. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't skimpy. It was just a regular two-piece swimsuit I bought on sale last summer. I had worn it before at a friend's house at the beach, even at school camp. But that day, when I wore it inside my own home, everything changed. There was no warning, no loud argument, no accusations. Just a silence so thick it felt like the walls were watching. My mom looked up from the kitchen table, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. My father didn't even speak. He just got up from his chair, walked past me like I was invisible, and shut the front door behind him. At first I thought they were shocked. Maybe they thought I was going out like this. Maybe they thought I was trying to provoke them. But the truth is, I was just tired of hiding. I was tired of the double standards of being policed for every inch of fabric I wore. It wasn't about rebellion, it was about freedom. And for a second, just 1 second, I thought they might understand. But the next hour shattered that hope. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. "Pack your things. You're not welcome here anymore." That was it. No conversation, no warning, just exile. Because of a bikini. Because of what it meant to them. Because to them, my body in that outfit represented shame, disrespect, rebellion. But to me, it represented control, choice, autonomy, and they couldn't handle that. I didn't even have time to cry. I stood there, heart thudding, lungs heavy, wondering what I had done wrong. Wondering when I stopped being their daughter and started being a problem. Wondering how wearing a bikini turned me into someone they had to remove. I stared at that text for what felt like hours, my mind spinning in circles, trying to understand how love could evaporate so quickly. Was it ever really love or just control, wearing the mask of care? I stayed in the bathroom for a long time, clutching the counter like it was the only stable thing left in my world. The silence outside the door wasn't just quiet, it was empty, like they had already erased me. Like my presence in that house was a stain they were trying to scrub out. I finally opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The house felt unfamiliar, like it had swallowed up every memory we had built. The family photos on the wall looked like portraits of strangers. My footsteps echoed off the hardwood floors, mocking me with every step. I peeked into my room, expecting anything to tell me this was still my home. But it wasn't. My suitcase was on the bed, not packed, just placed there. A statement. A symbol. You know what to do. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I couldn't. My throat felt like it was full of broken glass. My hands shook as I grabbed it and began placing clothes inside. I didn't know where I would go. I didn't know who I could call. All I knew was that I wasn't allowed to stay. They didn't yell, they didn't plead, they didn't explain. It was like I had become invisible, like I was being erased from their lives, one piece of fabric at a time. That bikini was just a trigger. The real issue ran deeper. They wanted obedience, conformity, silence. And when I refused, even without words, they reacted the only way they knew how: punishment. I kept packing, shirt after shirt, jeans, a couple of books. The silence was unbearable. I tried to think of every moment I had pleased them, obeyed them, made them proud. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All they could see was a girl in a bikini. A girl who dared to make her own choices. A girl who didn't fit the mold. I zipped up the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked to the door. My heart breaking. With every step, when I stepped outside, the air felt colder than it should have been. The sun was still shining, but it didn't warm me. I stood on the porch, staring at the street, at the neighbors' cars, at the cracks in the sidewalk I used to skip over as a kid. I had nowhere to go. I texted my best friend, hoping she could let me crash for a night or two. She didn't answer. I sat on the porch for almost an hour before I finally started walking. No destination, just away. Every step felt heavier, like I was dragging the weight of my childhood behind me. I passed the park where my parents took me every Sunday. I passed the bakery where my mom and I shared blueberry muffins. And all I could think was, did none of that matter? Was it really that easy to lock me out of their lives? For years, I had swallowed their rules, their judgments, their silent expectations. I had been the perfect daughter, until I wasn't. And all it took was a swimsuit to tip the scales. I reached a bench and sat down. My phone was still silent. No messages, no apologies. I didn't expect any. I opened Instagram, scrolled through photos of friends laughing, traveling, living lives untouched by this kind of pain. And for a second, I wondered if maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive, too stubborn, too dramatic. But then I remembered how it felt to put that bikini on. free, beautiful, myself. And I knew that wasn't wrong. What was wrong was how they reacted, how quickly they turned love into rejection, how easily they replaced parenting with punishment. I wiped my eyes and stood up. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't go back. If I had to start over, I would. But not as their puppet. Not as their silent, obedient doll. I would start over as me. I kept walking with my bag digging into my shoulder, the strap leaving a red mark across my skin, but I didn't stop. There was a strange kind of freedom in that pan. It reminded me that I was still real, still here, still capable of moving forward, even if the people who raised me had slammed a door in my face without a second thought. I passed through neighborhoods I hadn't walked through since I was younger. The air filled with smells of weekend barbecues and distant laughter. It was surreal to think that while other families were spending their days planning parties, eating together, watching movies, mine was actively erasing me. And for what? A bikini? No, it was never about the swimsuit. It was about power, about fear, about the idea that a girl who made her own choices was a threat. I thought back to all the rules I had quietly accepted over the years. The clothes. I wasn't allowed to wear the makeup I had to sneak on at school and wipe off before I came home. The words I wasn't allowed to say because they were disrespectful, and all the times I bit my tongue to keep the peace. But this time, I hadn't even spoken. I had just existed in my skin, in my space, in an outfit they didn't approve of, and for that I was banished. I finally reached a gas station and ducked. Inside, to get some water, the cashier gave me a long look, probably wondering why a girl with a suitcase looked like she'd just lost everything. I didn't explain. I just paid and left. Outside, I sat on the curb and opened the bottle, trying to steady my breathing. My phone buzzed again. A message from my dad. Hope you found a place. We won't be unlocking the door. No, hello. No, are you safe? Just confirmation that I was no longer their problem. I didn't cry. I was past that now. Every tear I could cry had already been cried in the silence of that bathroom hours ago. I took a deep breath and pulled up the map on my phone. I wasn't going to beg anyone to take me in. I would figure it out. One step at a time. If they thought locking me out would break me, they didn't understand who they raised. I found a cheap hostel online that had a bed available for the night. It wasn't much, but it had 4 walls and a door that locked hand right now. That was enough. I called for a rideshare and waited under the flickering street lamp, surrounded by night air and headlights passing like thoughts I couldn't catch. The ride was silent, and I was grateful for that. I didn't have the energy to pretend everything was okay. When I checked in, the woman at the front desk handed me a key and gave me a tired smile. "You traveling alone?" she asked. I just nodded. She didn't press. Room 204 was small, plain, and smelled faintly of bleach, but it felt like a sanctuary. I dropped my bag by the wall and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling paint on the walls and listening to muffled voices through the thin door. I was officially on my own. No money in my account. I knew my parents had access to the shared savings they'd helped set up for emergencies. I checked my balance, $14.67, not even enough for a full meal. I felt the panic start to rise, again, but I swallowed it. This was real now. This wasn't just about being misunderstood or punished. This was survival. I plugged in my phone and opened a notes app. If I was going to rebuild, I needed a plan. I started writing down everything I could think of. Friends I might call, shelters in the city, places that offered help to women in crisis. My fingers trembled. I was 18. An adult in the eyes of the world. Maybe, but still a girl who used to eat cereal on the couch while her parents read the paper. Still someone who thought unconditional love meant something. I curled up on the bed and pulled the thin sheet over me, staring at the ceiling. I didn't feel angry. I felt hollow. Like my identity had been stolen, not by strangers, but by the people who gave me my name. But if they could take that version of me away, then maybe it was time to create a new one. One who didn't need their approval to exist. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on my mother's face, the way she wouldn't meet my gaze, the coldness that replaced every memory of warmth I once clung to. I replayed that moment 100 times, trying to figure out if maybe I had missed something, some sign, some trigger, some crack in the foundation of our family that I didn't notice until it collapsed. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The collapse didn't happen that day. It started long before, with every comment about my clothes, with every time I was told to sit differently, talk differently, be different. The bikini was just the final straw. That morning, I woke up early and headed down to the common room. There was a bulletin board with flyers, job postings, shelters, group counseling meetings. One flyer caught my eye. Need emergency assistance? Call us. No judgment, just help. I took a picture of it and stepped outside to call. A soft voice answered on the second ring. Her name was Alicia. She listened as I explained what happened. She didn't gasp, she didn't lecture. She said, "Okay, let's start by making sure you're safe." I nearly cried just hearing someone speak with kindness. She gave me directions to a women's resource center a few blocks away. I packed up, checked out, and started walking. The center was small but filled with life, people laughing softly, others crying in private corners, volunteers handing out food, blankets, hugs. Alicia met me at the front desk. She had curly hair and eyes that said she'd seen it all. She took me into a quiet office, offered me tea, and just listened. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't just a burden. I was a person. We talked about options housing, legal help, therapy. She said, "You don't have to do everything today. You just have to keep going." And something about that made me feel like maybe I could. By the end of the day, I had a temporary place to sleep, nothing fancy. Just a clean bed in a shared room at a transitional home funded by the same center. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt like progress. Alicia had arranged everything, and her calm voice still echoed in my head. "You don't have to prove anything. You already survived what others wouldn't." Those words wrapped around me like armor. I stood in the shared bathroom later that night, brushing my hair in front of the mirror. I didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. Something in me had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking. I was expanding. I wasn't scared of being alone. I was learning what it meant to be free. I looked down at the shirt I was wearing, one of the few clean ones left in my bag, and remembered how my mother once said it was too tight, and that only certain girls wear things like that. I had laughed awkwardly, nodded, changed, but now, I wore it with no apology. That moment was small, but it marked something huge in me. That night, I stayed up writing, not just a plan, a letter to them. Not to beg, not to explain, but to say the words I never got to speak. I wrote everything how it felt to grow up in a home where silence was expected, where questions were seen as defiance, where love came with conditions and praise came with warnings. I told them that I wasn't angry, I was done. Done tiptoeing around their discomfort. Done burying myself to protect their image. Done making myself small to fit their idea of respectable. I saved the letter in my phone. Not to send, but to remember. I didn't need to hand them my pain anymore. They had enough chances to hold me, and instead, they chose to push me out. And strangely, that rejection was becoming my rebirth. The next week was a whirlwind. I filed a request for temporary financial aid through the center. I started attending group therapy sessions where girls like me shared their stories, some more tragic, some eerily similar. One girl had been kicked out because she dyed her hair. Another for dating someone her parents didn't approve of. We all shared the same wound. Love that came with strings attached. I listened, I cried, I spoke, I healed. Each session chipped away at the guilt I had carried, guilt that didn't even belong to me. And with every tear, I reclaimed a little more of who I was. I also applied for part-time jobs, cafes, bookstores, front desks, anything that would let me build a routine and not depend on others. A coffee shop finally called me back. The manager, Maria, interviewed me over the phone and said, "I don't care where you've been. I care about where you're going." I started the following Monday. The work was harderly mornings, rude customers, aching feet, but it felt like a blessing. I earned my first paycheck in 2 weeks, and I remember holding that envelope like it was a trophy. I went to a small diner afterward and bought myself pancakes, not because I was hungry, but because I could. I sat by the window watching people walk by and smiled for the first time in days. Not a forced smile, a real one, a quiet one, a proud one. I still didn't hear from my parents, and that was okay. I no longer waited for their apology, their explanation, or their approval. I was learning that love doesn't always come from the people who raise you. Sometimes it comes from strangers who show you kindness without asking anything in return. Sometimes it comes from yourself, when you finally decide that you deserve better than silence and shame. Weeks passed. I moved into a shared apartment with 2 other girls from the shelter program, Kayla and Aisha. They had their own stories, their own scars. But we formed a kind of sisterhood built on survival and second chances. We cooked cheap meals together, shared late-night stories, laughed until we cried. The apartment was small, with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, but it was ours. There were no rules taped to the fridge, no sideways glances for wearing shorts, no judgment when someone came home crying, just a quiet understanding that we were building new lives, one fragile brick at a time. My room had a window that overlooked a street lamp, and every night I would sit on the edge of the bed and write in a notebook I'd bought with my first tips. I didn't just write about pain anymore, I wrote about possibility. about the version of me that was emerging from the rubble. The one who wore whatever she wanted. The one who laughed with her mouth open. The one who said no without guilt. One night, Kayla found me on the fire escape, lost in my thoughts. She handed me a bowl of microwave popcorn and said, "We're watching a terrible rom-com? You're not allowed to be sad tonight." I laughed and followed her back inside. And for once, I didn't feel like the girl who got kicked out for wearing a bikini. I felt like a woman who had risen from that moment with more strength than anyone expected. I felt like someone who had been freed, not abandoned. Because maybe the door they locked was never really my home to begin with. Maybe I had just outgrown it, and maybe, just maybe, that rejection was a blessing wrapped in cruelty. One afternoon, I came home from my shift at the coffee shop and found an envelope on the kitchen counter. It had my name on it, written in unfamiliar handwriting. Kayla. Said someone had slid it under the door while I was out. My heart immediately jumped to conclusions. Had my parents found me? Was this a letter full of guilt? Or worse, another round of rejection? I opened it slowly, bracing myself. But it wasn't from them. It was from an older woman who ran the support center I had visited weeks ago. Her name was Janet. She had read my intake paperwork and remembered my story. In her letter, she wrote how proud she was of the progress I'd made. She said she saw something in me: resilience, clarity, strength. She ended her letter with, "When they shut the door on you, they didn't know they were giving you a key to yourself." I read those words over and over again. My eyes welled up, not because it hurt, but because it healed. Someone saw me. Someone acknowledged my survival, not just my struggle. I pinned that letter above my bed, a reminder that even when love fails you at home, it can still find you in the world. Around the same time, I started a blog. It was anonymous at first. I didn't want to be found. I titled it "The Girl on the Porch." My first post. The day I was locked out, I wrote about the silence, the suitcase, the walk through the city, the first night alone. I thought maybe 5 people would read it, but within a week, hundreds had. Girls from different places messaged me saying they had felt that same kind of betrayal. Some had been kicked out. Some had been emotionally erased. Some had just been quietly suffocating. My inbox filled with stories, and slowly, my story became something bigger than pain. It became a spark. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. What started as survival was turning into solidarity. Months passed. I balanced my job at the coffee shop with late-night writing and weekend meetings at the support center. I began speaking at small events, panels on youth empowerment, safe spaces, mental health awareness. I didn't have all the answers, but I had my truth, and that truth was enough. People listened. They cried, they clapped. Some stayed behind to hug me. One girl said, "I thought I was broken, but hearing you made me feel like I'm just healing." That sentence stayed with me. Healing, not broken, not damaged, just healing. I took those words and stitched them into everything I did, every post, every story, every cup of coffee I handed across the counter. I stopped seeing myself as the girl who got kicked out. I was the woman who walked away with her head high, even if it was trembling at the time. One chilly evening in November, I passed by a store window and caught my reflection. I didn't recognize her. She looked taller, more sure of herself. Her eyes didn't dart around nervously. Her shoulders weren't hunched. Her smile was soft. Yes, but it was real. I stepped closer and looked at her. Me. Not the version my parents built with rules and warnings. Not the version I tried to become to make them proud. Me. And I liked her. For the first time, I truly liked her. I went home that night and wrote a post titled, "Dear Bikini Girl." It was a letter to my past self. I told her she was brave, that she was never the problem, that the world didn't end, it began. I wrote about the day they shut the door, and how that day was the first step toward opening all the others. My blog kept growing. I started getting messages from social workers, educators, even journalists who wanted to share the story. I was hesitant. I wasn't doing this for fame or exposure, but I realized something powerful. The more people who heard it, the fewer girls might feel alone when it happens to them. So I said yes. One reporter asked if she could include my original letter, the one I wrote in that hostel the night I was kicked out. I read it again for the first time in months. It still made me cry, but not from pain, from pride. I sent it. The article went viral. Within 2 days, I got a message from a burner email that I recognized immediately. My mother. The email was short. "I saw your story. We didn't think it would go that far. Call me." I stared at it for an hour. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Should I respond? Should I let her back in? Should I ask why she never came to find me? But then I realized I didn't need answers. I didn't need closure wrapped in an apology, months too late. I had found peace without her. I had rebuilt from nothing. Her silence back then had taught me more than her words now ever could. So I didn't reply. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I wasn't writing a story that ended with me crawling back. I was writing one where I stood strong even when no one was clapping. I sat down that night and wrote another post, this one titled, "You Can Miss People You Don't Want Back." It resonated deeply. The comments poured in, people sharing stories, thank yous, confessions, and I realized that what I lost in one locked door I had found in an open world. Not everyone who hurts you deserves a seat at your healed table. Some people are part of your origin, not your destiny. The media had picked up the story by then, and while some outlets framed it as a cautionary tale of family dynamics and outdated values, others spun it into a broader narrative about generational conflict. I received interview requests, offers to appear on talk shows, and even a few publishing offers asking me to tell my story in book form. I didn't rush into anything. I wanted to be deliberate and not let others twist my story into something I didn't recognize. One night I got a message from my mom. It was short. "You embarrassed us. You humiliated your father." But maybe we were too harsh. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. But it was the first crack in their wall of silence. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready. I reread it several times, each time trying to decide whether it was guilt, manipulation, or some mixture of both. Meanwhile, I kept working with my counselor, digging into the years of small slights, rules, and judgments I had endured. It was freeing to put words to the unspoken pressures I had grown up with, the way love had always been conditional, tied to behavior, presentation, obedience. At times, I felt furious for the years I had tried so hard to win approval that would never come. But there were other times I mourned. Not just the parents I had, but the kind of parents I had always longed for. People online kept asking if I'd reconcile, if I'd go back, if I'd forgive. But what they didn't understand was, this wasn't about a single bikini. It was about a lifetime of suppression, a pattern of being silenced. When I wore that bikini, I didn't just break a rule. I broke their illusion of control. That terrified them more than anything else. And now, I was no longer willing to play along. I wasn't the same girl anymore. I had finally stepped into the sun, and no one was going to shove me back into the shadows. I began channeling the attention into something meaningful. I started a video series, not about bikinis or rebellion, but about self-expression, boundaries, and healing from toxic family systems. The response was overwhelming. People shared their stories of being disowned, shamed, or controlled for choices as personal as clothing, relationships, or careers. One woman messaged me saying, "I watched your video and wore shorts for the first time in years. My husband actually cried seeing me that happy." Another wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to finally speak up at the dinner table." It was surreal to think something so painful in my life could become a source of strength for others. I never imagined I'd become an accidental advocate. But there I was, not preaching, not shouting, just telling the truth. My truth slowly. The brand I had started with just a sketchbook and savings began to flourish. Orders poured in, collaborations happened, and soon I was able to hire a small team. We worked out of a cozy co-working space where sunlight streamed through big windows, the opposite of the dark, closed-in spaces I had known growing up. I filled the walls with colors, quotes, affirmations. Every garment we made carried a message of freedom, choice, and power. I called the collection Unlocked. When I revealed that name in a live stream, many longtime followers teared up. They knew exactly what it meant. One wrote, "You were locked out, and then you unlocked yourself?" That comment stayed with me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. I hadn't just lost a home. I had created a new one inside myself. Months later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my father. The envelope was thick, the paper expensive, his handwriting formal and carefully spaced. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside, he had written 4 pages. He spoke of regret, of reflection. He didn't fully apologize, not in the way I might have dreamed, but he acknowledged his actions. He admitted he was afraid of losing control of the world, changing faster than he could keep up, afraid that the daughter he raised had grown into a woman he no longer understood. He confessed that locking the door had been an act of panic, not principle. He wrote, "It was easier to shut you out than face what I didn't want to see, that you were becoming your own person." I cried reading that. Not because it made everything okay, but because it made something true. At the end, he said he didn't expect forgiveness, only understanding. That was all I needed. I wrote him back, not to make peace, but to make boundaries. I told him I was open to conversation, not lectures. I was willing to meet, not retreat. If he could accept me as I was, fully, freely, Then maybe someday we could find a new path forward. We met a month later at a cafe halfway between our homes. The silence was awkward. The air was thick with things unsaid. But when he looked me in the eye and said, "You're braver than I ever was," I knew something had shifted. We may never return to what we were, but we could start building something new, something honest. And it all began with a moment. I stood alone, barefoot on the porch, locked out for wearing a bikini, but finally stepping into my power.